Imagine working with someone for 3 years and finding out they were never who you thought. That's what happened the night soldiers stormed a hospital looking for a legend no one believed was real. But when a dying soldier arrives and enemies start closing and the truth comes out. And the quiet nurse? She was the most dangerous one there.
Colonel Vance slammed his fist on the administrator's desk. A coffee cup jumped and then broke into pieces on the ground. I could not care less about your rules, he growled with a dangerous tone. You have 4 minutes to clear this emergency room of all civilians, or my soldiers will. The administrator had not been spoken to like that in 30 years, and he instinctively moved back. Through the window, 8 military helicopters sat on the lawn. Armed soldiers were marching through the hospital corridors. And hidden, somewhere inside, was America's most celebrated combat medic. She hoped with all her might that they would never find her. If this scene has your heart racing, make sure to subscribe so you do not miss what happens next. Please let me know in the comments what city you are from. I would love to see where this story is being heard. Now, let us go back to where it all started. Flora Montgomery lived by a strict routine. Each night, she arrived at St. Jude Medical Center at 10:45, just before her shift started. She parked in the same spot at the far end of the lot every time. She entered through a side door to sign in and said less than 6 words to people. The silence was something she cherished. She aimed to be consistent, quiet, and completely invisible. She had perfected the art of going unnoticed. Her locker was number 47, in the 3rd row of the employee locker room. It held 2 extra uniforms, a protein bar for later, and a tiny picture. The photo was tucked behind a metal plate hidden from sight. Nobody else knew the photograph existed. She had not looked at it in nearly a year, but she just could not throw it away. Certain memories cling to you, no matter how much they hurt. Flora put on her scrubs, carefully avoiding her own reflection. She never looked at herself these days. She pulled her hair back into a tight bun. A few strands of her hair always escaped and framed her face. She had a habit of tugging her sleeves down over her wrists. She kept them constantly concealed, both of them. Montgomery. The sharp voice broke the locker room's silence. Flora spun around to see Deborah Sims, the head nurse, holding a clipboard and looking annoyed. Deborah was 53 years old and had a personality as sharp as a surgical knife. She could not stand incompetence, a trait she saw in nearly everyone she worked with. Barnes is out sick again, Deborah stated flatly. That makes 3 times this month. You are on triage duty tonight. Flora just blinked. All right. Deborah seemed to be waiting for a different response. No complaints? You are not asking for extra pay? You are not going to push back at all? No. Deborah watched her for a moment longer. All right then. You are an odd one, Montgomery. She pivoted and left the room. A tiny smile almost formed on Flora's lips. Almost. Triage on a Thursday in Oregon was typically slow. It was usually just sprained ankles and chest pains from panic attacks. Flora attended to every patient with a calm and reassuring presence. Her voice was always even, her hands perfectly still. She mastered that stillness long ago, in a world far removed from this one. Around midnight, the emergency room got busier. There were 12 patients, and 3 were critical. Flora had just stabilized a 62-year-old heart attack victim and treated a teenager with a severe burn. She had also reassured a frantic young mother, showing her that the child swallowed a small pencil eraser, not a battery. She was updating charts at the nurse's station when Dr. Paul Hennessy approached. He held a mug of coffee and was attempting to look casual. Seems like a slow night, he offered. Flora kept typing. Can I get you some coffee? I brewed a whole pot. I am all right. You always say that, because I am always all right. Paul, who was 44, had been trying to talk to Flora for 8 months. He lacked the nerve to actually ask her out. He was a nice person, and Flora hoped he would soon focus on someone else. Any plans for the weekend? He tried again. Work. You work every weekend. Someone has to staff the hospital. He chuckled softly. You are a quiet person, but you sure know how to end a conversation. Flora at last lifted her eyes to meet his. They were not unkind, just completely direct. Paul, please go drink your coffee. He nodded, admitting defeat, and turned to leave. Flora went back to her charting, At 12:37, the first vibration rumbled through the building. She felt it through her shoes a second before the sound reached her. It was a low, strong shudder. It might have been a large truck passing on the street, but Flora recognized that feeling instantly. She had felt it many times before, in locations very different from a peaceful hospital in Oregon. Her hands froze over the keyboard. She raised her head. Across the emergency room, a couple of other nurses looked puzzled. They looked up at the ceiling lights and then at each other. The patient in bed 3 asked about the noise. Someone else nervously joked about construction work. Flora pushed her chair back and stood up. The shaking was growing more intense. It was not a truck. It was not construction. It was the thumping of heavy helicopter rotors getting closer and fast. She walked to the window near the ambulance bay. She rested her palm on the cool glass for 3 seconds, feeling the steady beat. Then she stepped away. "Deborah," she called, her voice completely level. From across the room, Deborah was already watching her. One look at Flora's expression sent the head nurse hurrying over. "What is that noise?" Deborah asked quietly. "You need to relocate the non-critical patients to the other wing," Flora instructed. "Do it now, and do it calmly so nobody panics." Deborah just looked at her. "Why?" Flora held her gaze without flinching. Something in Flora's eyes told Deborah not to question the order. "Ortega, Patterson, clear out treatment bays 1 to 4, right now," Deborah commanded. Her voice was as forceful as ever. She gave no hint that she did not know why she was doing this. The sound was now a powerful, low hum, making the intravenous bags shake on their poles. "Is that a helicopter?" asked a young nurse named Cassie. She was just 26. The first one came into view, its searchlight cutting through the dark parking lot. A second appeared right behind it, then a third. A person nearby breathed, "Oh my gosh." When the fourth and fifth helicopters appeared, patients were getting out of bed to see. The woman in Bay 7 started to weep. The young mother pulled her child close and backed away from the window. Deborah stared right at Flora. "Montgomery, tell me what is happening." Flora watched the aircraft land with an odd look. It was not fear. And it was not surprise either. It was something far more complicated. 8, she whispered, as if talking to herself. What was that? There are 8? She could now distinguish the sound of each separate engine, all of them thundering together. That is a full tactical extraction unit. Deborah seized her by the arm. "Flora, what is your connection to this?" Flora glanced down at Deborah's hand, then met her eyes. For just a moment, the woman who worked so hard at being unseen let her guard down. A look of ancient wisdom filled her eyes. It was the look of someone who knew precisely what 8 black helicopters meant. "Nothing," Flora said softly. "Just keep people calm and call security." But security was already coming, and they were completely overwhelmed. The soldiers were already inside the hospital. They entered with swift, professional motions. 8 came through the main doors. 4 more came in by the ambulance entrance. They were all in full tactical gear. They moved with such flawless teamwork that the big room instantly felt cramped. They did not raise their weapons or yell any commands. Their professionalism was total. Their silent efficiency was more unnerving than shouting ever could be. One soldier raised a hand and spoke clearly. "All non-essential personnel, please proceed to the far end of the hall. You are in no danger. We just require your cooperation." But no one moved. They were all in shock. Then a new voice sliced through the quiet from behind the soldiers. This voice was not asking, "Clear this room." It was not shouted. It was the type of voice that carried authority without volume. A voice people followed instantly. At 12:41 in the morning, Colonel John Vance stepped into the St. Jude Medical Center emergency room. He had the hard look of someone who spent 30 years making unimaginable choices. He was in his late 50s, his face carved by struggles worse than any tempest, and his gaze moved over the room like a sensor, capturing every single detail. He stopped right in the middle of all the chaos. Deborah, true to form, walked over to confront him. "This is a hospital. You cannot just come in here like this. I do not care who you are. I will need to see some." "Where is Angel 6? Vance cut her off. A thick silence fell over the entire room. "I am sorry," What? Deborah asked, completely baffled. Angel 6. His gaze was already sweeping the area, taking in every person, every uniform, and every visible corner. I am looking for Angel 6, and I need to find her immediately. I do not know what you mean, Deborah said. We have no one here by that. Her voice trailed off when she turned and saw Flora's spot at the nurse's station was empty. No official hospital map showed the supply hall behind the station. It was a tight, poorly lit corridor that ran for about 40 feet along the main emergency room before it split. One path went to the pharmacy, the other led to a service stairway. Flora knew the route perfectly after only 3 days. Within her first 2 weeks, she had the layout of the whole hospital memorized. It was not something she thought about. It was an old, ingrained instinct. She moved through the dark hallway without a light, her left hand skimming the wall to guide her. Her footsteps were completely silent on the tile floor. She did not run, because running shows panic, and she could not afford that weakness. She reviewed the facts. 8 helicopters, soldiers in full combat gear, and a colonel arriving in person. Then they said the name, her old name, one she had hidden so well she nearly forgot it herself. Someone had said it aloud in this Nupki right here in her emergency room. She had 3 peaceful years. 3 years of being invisible on purpose. 3 years of wearing old scrubs, keeping her voice down, and parking in the farthest space. It took 3 years to become Flora Montgomery, the quiet, overlooked nurse on the night shift. She leaned against the wall and shut her eyes for just 3 seconds. They had found her. She did not know how. She had been so careful. Her name was legally changed long before the mission that was meant to be her last. She had relocated 3 separate times. She built a life so perfectly average it served as camouflage. Yet somehow, Vance still found her. She opened her eyes. John Vance could always find anyone he was looking for. She knew this about him. She had known it for a very long time. She knew it back when she trusted him, back when she was a totally different person, and back when trust was not so complicated for her. She started walking again, heading for the service stairs. Behind her, she could hear the controlled mayhem of soldiers trying to manage hospital staff and scared patients. Over it all, she could hear Vance's voice, asking questions like a man who was sure of the answers. She reached the stairwell door and pushed it open. Private First Class Danny O stood waiting for her. He was young, maybe 24, with a calm that came from training, not experience. He was not aiming his rifle at her. He held it across his chest and looked at her with an almost regretful expression. "Ma'am," he said. Flora took a moment to size him up. She noted his posture, his position, how his eyes followed her hands, and the slight tension in his jaw that showed he wanted things to go smoothly. "How many exits did he cover?" she asked. Danny blinked, and the answer came out before he could stop it. "All of them, ma'am." Flora let out a soft sigh. Of course he did. She turned and started walking back to the emergency room. After 12 steps, she heard Vance's voice getting closer. He had already figured out where she had gone. She had maybe 30 seconds left. She used 20 of them standing perfectly still, just breathing, letting the woman named Flora Montgomery accept this new reality. Then she stepped out of the hallway and back into the bright light of the emergency room. Vance saw her right away. His face showed no emotion, but his eyes locked onto her with total certainty, like a compass finding north. "There she is," he said to the room. Everyone turned to look. Every soldier, nurse, and patient who was able stared at her. Dr. Paul Hennessy stood by the medicine cart with his coffee mug, his mouth hanging open in shock. Deborah Sims had her arms crossed, looking back and forth between Flora and the colonel, clearly rethinking everything she thought she knew. Cassie, a newer nurse, whispered, "Who is that?" Vance walked toward Flora, and she did not move. He stopped 4 feet away from her. He looked older up close than she remembered, but his eyes were the same. They were still dark and intense, and they carried the burden of 1,000 difficult decisions. "You look different," he said. "I am different," she answered. "No." He shook his head once. "You look different." But you are not. She held his gaze. What do you want, Colonel? You already know. Tell me anyway. He watched her for a second before speaking. Barnes is dying. The name hit her like a physical force, but she showed no reaction. She stood completely still and kept her voice even. What happened? A mission went bad. His jaw tightened. 18 hours ago. We pulled him out, but he is. He left the sentence unfinished. That tiny pause from a man who never paused told her more than any medical file could. The surgeons on base cannot get him stable. He is on the chopper now. We have about 40 minutes. 40 minutes for what? For you to come and do what you do. The room fell completely silent. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. Every eye was on Flora. She looked at Vance for a long, quiet moment. Then she spoke so quietly that only he could hear. You had no right to come here. I am aware, he said. And that was it. He did not make any excuses. You have no right to use that name. I know. Ann Barnes. Her voice cracked for a split second, a sound so faint that only someone listening carefully would have caught it. Barnes did not deserve to be caught in the middle of your mission. Vance did not answer. Flora looked down at her hands, which were flat on the counter in front of her. It was a habit she had when the past got too close. Her hands were steady. They were always steady, no matter what was happening around her or inside her. It was the one piece of her that never changed. She looked back at him. Bring him in, she ordered. Vance nodded sharply and raised his radio. Deborah came up beside Flora, her voice low and tense. Flora, what is going on? Who are you? Flora just reached down and pushed up her sleeve. An angel's wing was tattooed from her wrist to her elbow. The lines were bold and black, the feathers drawn with amazing and specific detail. She got it 2 months after the incident in the very first city she fled to. It served as both a tribute and a warning. It was a tribute to the woman she was trying to leave behind, and a warning for why she had to. Deborah just stared at the tattoo. What does that mean? It means, Flora said, already heading to a trauma bay, that for tonight, you will just have to trust me. She never looked back. She was pulling on gloves when the doors burst open and they wheeled Barnes in on a gurney. She had tried to prepare herself for this, but it was useless. The moment she saw the stretcher, she saw Michael Barnes, the man who once carried her out of a fire without hesitation. Now he was covered in tubes and bandages, his skin a pale white that showed he was losing his fight. Something inside her shifted into place, a feeling so strong she could almost taste it. The Flora who parked far away and spoke in a soft voice was still there. She had just moved aside. Give me his status, she said to the medic with the gurney. Her voice was completely different now. It carried a new authority that got the attention of everyone in the room, even if they had no idea why. Gunshot, blast, or both? Both, the medic said, his own voice immediately becoming more professional to match hers. Shrapnel in his left chest, 1 bullet to the right abdomen, his lung collapsed. We fixed it, but it is collapsing again. His pressure is dropping. His heart rate is... I can see his heart rate. She was already by his side. Her hands were moving, doing what they knew how to do without thinking. Her world became very small, just like it always did. It was just the patient on the table. And the very next step that needed to be taken, who is my trauma surgeon? That would be me. Dr. Hennessy was on the other side of the gurney. He sounded professional, but his shock was obvious underneath. He was a man looking at a woman he thought he knew, only to realize he did not know her at all. Paul Hennessy. Paul. She looked up, her eyes meeting his over Barnes's unconscious body. You will do exactly as I say. You will be fast, and you will ask no questions. Understand? She locked her eyes on his for 2 long seconds. Yes, he answered. With a quick, firm nod, she said, Then let us start. The trauma room doors swung shut behind them. Out in the hall, Colonel Vance stood perfectly still, his eyes glued to those doors. Deborah came to his side. In her 28 years as a nurse, she had seen things that would be with her forever. She witnessed the worst of humanity and the very best, along with all the complicated moments in between. Her gaze shifted to the doors. She will save him, will she not? Deborah asked. The words sounded like a statement, not a question. Vance was quiet for a second before he answered, She always succeeds. Inside, Flora Montgomery laid her hands on the chest of the man who was once her sergeant. She felt the ragged rhythm of his breathing and ordered, Get me an 18-gauge needle, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, immediately. Her hands did not shake. They never did. The trauma room was a small space that felt even smaller now. Flora moved in a quiet, so intense, it felt heavy. It pulled everyone into her orbit, forcing them to match her pace and even her breathing. Paul Hennessy had been a trauma surgeon for 11 years. He had worked with top surgeons, brilliant residents, and the nurses who were the very heart of the hospital. But he had never seen anyone treat a patient with her level of skill. She never repeated an order. Her decisions were instant and absolute. Each movement flowed into the next as if her hands already knew the way. Her badge identified her as a nurse, but her ability suggested something else entirely. I need a chest tube, she said with quiet authority. Ortega, the other nurse, had it in hand before she finished speaking. What is his pressure? Flora asked, her eyes never leaving the patient. 74/40, Paul replied. It will drop again before it stabilizes, so I need everyone to stay focused. She spoke as her hands performed a steady, precise ballet, ignoring the screaming alarms and the crushing tension in the room. She even tuned out Colonel John Vance, the man from her other life, standing only a few yards away. Michael, she whispered, a vow directed only at Barnes. I need you to stay with me. Do you hear me? You will not give up on me. But Barnes was unresponsive. His breathing was faint, his body dedicated to that single, desperate function. He cannot hear you, Ortega said softly. Oh, yes, he can, Flora answered with total conviction in her voice. They always can. Paul watched her masterful work in complete silence. The clock showed 12:51 in the morning. A strange hush had descended upon the entire emergency room. Without orders, the soldiers had fanned out, securing every exit. They knew the real battle was happening in that room, where they were helpless to intervene. Near the nurses' station, Deborah Sims stood with her arms crossed tightly. She clenched her jaw, resisting the powerful urge to march in there. She had a burning need to confront the woman she thought she knew for 3 years, who now seemed like a complete stranger. Cassie came up beside her. What is happening in there? She whispered. Medicine, Deborah answered sharply. But she is only a nurse. A single glare from Deborah cut her off. Be still, Cassie. A young sergeant with cropped hair approached them. Ma'am, Sergeant Reyes, may I help manage the floor while your staff is occupied? Deborah sized her up for a moment. On a different night, she would have refused a soldier who offered to run her unit. But this was not a different night. Yes. Bed 6 needs a pressure reading. The man in Bay 8 is trying to climb out of bed again. And find me the portable ultrasound I requested 3 hours ago. Reyes gave a short nod and was gone. As she left, Deborah reflected on how rules and procedures sometimes meant nothing. By the window, Dr. Paul Hennessy's resident, Marcus Webb, was frozen. The 29-year-old had followed Paul's every step for 6 months, but now he just stared into the trauma room. He had been motionless for 4 straight minutes. Deborah recognized that expression. It was the look of someone whose whole world had just been shattered, leaving behind one giant question. She knew the feeling well. At 1:03 in the morning, Barnes's heart monitor blared a piercing alarm. Paul shouted what they all knew, but Flora was already in motion. He is in ventricular fibrillation, she announced. Paddles. Ortega began to object. But protocol says, paddles, Flora said again, her tone absolute. Ortega went quiet and grabbed them. Paul was already at the crash cart. Charging to 200, 150, Flora corrected. His chest cavity is unstable, 150. And watch your placement. He looked at her over the cart. Her gaze was unwavering and full of certainty. She was demanding his trust. He set the charge to 150. Clear. The electric shock caused Barnes's body to jolt on the table. The monitor flatlined, then a slow, weak beat returned. Paul finally let out a breath. Flora did not. Stay focused on him, she ordered. His pressure is dropping again. We must pack the abdominal wound before his heart fails. Paul chose his words carefully. Flora, what you just did, the charge, the placement, that is against all protocol. I am aware, she said. It is a field medicine technique. I adjusted it for his injuries. She pulled on fresh gloves, and it is very effective. How could you possibly know his injuries so well that... Because this is not my first time treating him, she interrupted. The words hung in the silence, hinting at a deep history Paul was just now seeing. Paul, I will tell you what I am able, but not until Michael Barnes is safe. Right now, I simply need a surgeon. Can you be that for me? Yes, he said, instantly. The time was 1:14 a.m. Most people misjudge Colonel Vance completely. They saw the firm jawline, heard the authoritative voice, and felt how he commanded a room. They concluded he was not a patient man. They assumed he was a person who insisted on immediate results and steamrolled obstacles because he refused to wait. They were very wrong. Vance had more patience than nearly anyone. He could withstand the kind of silence and uncertainty that broke other men for as long as was needed. It was a skill he had learned, knowing that haste is the parent of failure. But standing in this sterile hospital corridor, listening to the muffled chaos, his legendary patience was fraying. It had been 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days since his last encounter with Flora Montgomery. He did not need to recall the number. It was seared into his memory. It was like casualty counts, mission codes, or the location of a failed operation. He had been standing there for 31 minutes. Sergeant Reyes appeared at his side. Sir, we have an issue with the hospital administrator, a Mr. Garrett. He has been on a phone call for 20 minutes, and it sounds official. What kind of issue? Vance asked. It seems to be a legal matter, sir, she said. Vance's expression did not change. Please inform Mr. Garrett. This hospital is now under federal emergency mandate, 7 Bravo. I will gladly speak with him as soon as Sergeant Barnes is stable. Reyes hesitated. Sir, is that an actual mandate? Vance's tone was ice. It is now. She nodded and departed, leaving Vance to fix his gaze on the trauma room. He was the man who approved the mission that put Barnes on that table. He had assessed the intelligence, weighed the dangers, and given the final go-ahead. In more than 30 years, he had made thousands of similar calls. Most ended well, a few were disasters. It was a heavy part of command, a weight he had learned to carry years ago. He tried to remind himself of that now, but in this stark hallway, the familiar rationalizations offered little comfort. It was 1:22 a.m. She knew your name, Deborah said. Vance turned to see the head nurse beside him, having materialized without a sound. It was a practiced skill that made her quieter than most of his own soldiers. I am sorry, he asked. Flora. She was not surprised you knew her, but the look on her face when you said Barnes's name, that was something else. Deborah looked at him with an analytical stare that pierced his composure. What kind of trouble did you send him into? That information is classified. He is my patient, and his life is on the line. That is exactly why we are both standing here. Deborah considered his reply. How long have you been searching for her? Vance paused for a long moment. A while, he finally conceded. She did not wish to be found. No, Deborah confirmed. And yet you found her. It was a statement of fact as she connected the dots. And you came specifically for her tonight. Vance did not answer. She is the best you have ever seen, Deborah said. She stated it as if she knew it was the truth. After a long silence, Vance's quiet, yes, confirmed it. Deborah looked toward the trauma room doors. She has worked here for almost 3 years, she stated. Every single shift, she works like she is trying to prove her worth. She is never sick, never complains, and asks for nothing. Deborah let out a long sigh. I once believed she was just a person with incredible self-control. Well, she is that, Vance replied. No, Deborah corrected, slowly shaking her head. That is not it. She is someone who has been carrying a terrible burden for years. She works until she drops, so she never has to put it down and look at it. She gave him a knowing gaze. And I suppose you know what that burden is? Vance's jaw tensed slightly. Yes, he admitted. I do. It was 1:31 in the morning. Inside the trauma room, Flora was putting on her third pair of gloves. Michael Barnes's blood pressure had risen by 4 points. It was a small victory, but it counted. She felt like she knew his body as well as her own. She had operated on Barnes twice before, in settings that made this clean trauma room feel like a palace. She knew his blood type, all of his allergies, how his body reacted to shock, and the origin of a scar on his left arm from a mission in Kandahar they could never discuss. She knew he was a fighter, more resolute than anyone she had ever met, sometimes even more resolute than his own body. Come on, Michael, she whispered quietly. I know you can hear my voice. You are the most stubborn person I have ever had the misfortune to meet. You are not allowed to die this way. This is not the end of your story. Paul heard her speaking and glanced up from his task. You are talking to him again. I did not stop. Do you think his blood pressure is really climbing? Ortega wondered. Paul glanced at the screen. It showed 79/48. While dangerously low, it was improving. He looked back at Flora. I told you it would, she said. The time was 1:39 in the morning. The next problem came from a completely surprising direction. The main emergency room doors slid open, and a man in civilian clothes walked in. He was in his mid-50s, large, with the red face of someone who just had a shouting match. 2 men in suits were on either side of him, their federal badges shining on their belts. The man in the middle was Gerald Harmon, a deputy director from a government office with deliberately unclear power. He had been on an airplane for 3 hours and was very tired. His mood was foul, and he usually directed it at whoever was closest. That person was Colonel John Vance. The 2 men locked eyes. John, Harmon said. Gerald, Vance replied. A tense quiet fell over the emergency room. It was the type of silence that happens when people sense an old argument is about to start again. You did not have permission to retrieve Barnes like this, Harmon said. His voice was steady, but just barely. You were specifically ordered not to find or engage with the asset. Barnes was about to die. Barnes was a casualty from an authorized mission to be handled through the proper system. He was bleeding out in a field in a country I cannot name, Vance said, his voice turning dangerously low and cold. And you dare to talk to me about authority? She was not to be involved, Harmon shot back. That was the agreement. Her exit from the program was permanent. Her new identity was protected. You did not have the authority. She is the only one who can keep him alive. We have rules for these situations. The rules were failing him. Vance simply said, I made a decision. You made a decision. Harmon's voice became a whisper. John, do you realize what the fallout will be? She has been compromised. This entire hospital, every person here, they have all seen her. They heard the code name. It will leak. The information always leaks. We will handle it, Vance answered after she saves Barnes. And what about her choice in the matter? Deborah's voice cut through the tension. Both men turned to face her. Deborah Sims stood 5 feet away, her arms crossed and her patience gone. You, she said, her eyes fixed on Harmon. I do not know who you are, but you are in my hospital, discussing my nurse like she is an object. I need you to stop right now. Then she aimed her stare at Vance. And you showed up here because you needed her, not because you thought about what it would do to her. You know that is the absolute truth. She glared at both of them. For 3 years, that woman has built a peaceful, private life. She made something real for herself here. Tonight, you two came and destroyed it, and now you are standing here arguing about regulations. She shook her head with disgust. The both of you should be ashamed. Harmon simply stared at her, confused. Ma'am, this is an issue of national. I do not care, Deborah stated bluntly. A heavy silence settled in the room. Then, one of Harmon's agents leaned over and whispered to him. Harmon's face shifted in a way that was hard to read. What is it? Vance demanded. Harmon looked straight at him. His expression was altered. The official anger was there, but something else was underneath it now. If you looked closely, it was almost fear. There has been another event, Harmon said. Vance did not move a muscle. What kind of event? The same group that attacked Barnes's unit. They have identified the extraction point. He paused for a breath. They know she is here. It was 1:47 in the morning. Vance had his radio to his mouth before Harmon finished speaking. Reyes, set up a secure perimeter immediately. I want all exits watched. Nobody comes through these doors without my direct order. He turned to Harmon. How much time do we have? Our information says 30 minutes, maybe less. Who is coming for them? Deborah asked. Her voice had not changed. It was still even and in command, but her eyes briefly flickered toward the trauma room doors. The people who do not want Barnes to talk about what he saw, Harmon explained. Then, because Deborah was looking at him with an intensity that demanded a clearer answer, he continued. They are also the same people who want to make sure Angel 6 never becomes active again. Deborah looked back at Vance. She does not know about this. No. She is in there saving his life, with no idea that the people who attacked him are now coming here to find her. Vance's jaw was tight. We will tell her after Barnes is stabilized. What if she needs to know before that? He had no response because he knew the hard truth. Flora needed every single second to keep Barnes alive. If he went in there now and told her about the threat, it would break the concentration in that room. Even a tiny bit of her focus would shift, and that small distraction could be the difference between him living and dying. He had already weighed that risk in the 30 seconds after Harmon spoke. He knew it was a ruthless choice. He also knew it was the kind of choice Flora would never forgive him for making. He was used to people not forgiving him. She will be told when Barnes is stable, he said again. Deborah watched him for a long, hard second. Then she walked over to the nurse's station and picked up the phone. This is Charge Nurse Sims. I am putting the east and south wings on lockdown. I also want security posted at every first floor exit, and I need it done in the next 2 minutes. She waited for a response. Because I am telling you to, Kevin. Now move. She slammed the receiver down and faced Vance. I am not you. I will not make cold choices about what she deserves to know, but I will give you 5 more minutes before I go in there and tell her myself. Vance said, Thank you for that. Do not thank me, Deborah snapped. I did not do it for you. It was 1:55 in the morning. Flora felt the change in Barnes before the monitor did. It was a faint shift in his stillness, a tiny change in how his body pushed back against her hands. She had learned to feel it years ago, in places without fancy machines, where you relied on your hands and your gut feeling. He is starting to fight back, she said. Paul glanced up from the sutures he was working on. His pressure is still. He is fighting, she repeated, her voice soft but certain. Ortega announced, 86/52. Paul blinked, his eyes widening. He stared at the display. Wow, that is actually rising. Keep going, Flora commanded. We are not done, but he is helping us now. She let herself feel it for only a moment. It was a short, silent burst of relief. It was the odd comfort of knowing Michael Barnes's stubborn personality, the very thing she always complained about, was what was keeping him alive right now. That somewhere deep inside, past all the damage and blood loss, that stubborn, frustrating, incredible will to live was still there. You have always been my most difficult patient, she whispered to him, and right now, I have never been more grateful for that in my life. Paul looked at her from over his surgical mask. He had an expression she could not take the time to figure out. Flora, we are not safe yet, she answered. I know. I just do. He cut her off. It does not matter. Let us get this done. She nodded, and they returned to their work. At 2:04 in the morning, Barnes's pressure held at 91/60 when a voice crackled on Vance's radio. Colonel! It was Reyes, and he sounded tense. We have got movement on the south side. Vehicle lights, no plates visible, about 400 meters out, and they are not taking the highway. Vance glanced at Harmon, who said nothing. What is the count? Vance said into his radio. I see a minimum of 2 vehicles. Could be more concealed by the trees. We are working on getting eyes on them. Hold your ground. Do not engage. I will say it again. You will not engage until I give the command. He lowered the radio. Beside him, Deborah had dropped all pretense of not hearing. Your time is up, she told him. His gaze shifted to the trauma room doors. I am aware of that, he replied. and then he moved toward them. It was 2:07 in the morning. Flora registered the door opening but did not look up. "We are in the middle of a procedure," she stated. "Unless the hospital is on fire, you need to leave." "It is not on fire," Vance said, "but we are facing a much bigger issue." She still refused to look at him. The man on the table with 3 critical injuries was a simpler problem to face. He then said her name, Flora. Not Angel 6, not a code. The name she chose for herself, the very name she had used to build an entirely new life, that got her attention. Her hand stopped for just a moment. She gave Ortega a quick, meaningful glance that said everything, and then she turned. Vance stood in the doorway. He looked older in that light, or maybe she was just seeing him differently. He had a look on his face she had seen only a handful of times. It was not quite regret. John Vance was not a man who felt regret, but this was incredibly close. It was the expression of someone about to ask for the one thing he had no right to, and he knew it. "They know where you are," he said softly. The entire room went still. Ortega froze, her hand still on Barnes. Paul simply stared at the monitor, refusing to look away. Every single person heard him. Flora met Vance's eyes for a long moment. "How long do I have?" she asked. 20 minutes, maybe less. She looked at Barnes, then at the climbing numbers on the screen. She saw her own gloved hands, stained from the last 90 minutes. Looking back at Vance, her expression hardened with fresh resolve, erasing the doubt he had brought with him. The way forward became instantly clear, not because the circumstances were easy, but because her decision was. "All right," she said. She did not miss the slight flinch from Vance. "All right, Wayne, I understand," she repeated. "The answer is yes." Her focus snapped back to the patient. "But I am finishing this first. The man you brought to me, the one you broke our promise for, is on this table, and he is not stable." She smoothly took Ortega's spot with effortless skill. 20 minutes is more than enough. Now get out of my trauma room and let me work." For a heartbeat, Vance paused at the door. Then he said very quietly, "Yes, ma'am," and left. The door closed. From across the gurney, Paul Hennessy kept his gaze fixed on Flora. She would not look at him. Her complete focus was on her patient. Her jaw clenched. Her shoulders were rigid with an incredible display of control. This was the same woman who had vanished for 3 years. The woman who made a new life from scratch, now battling to save a man in the one room where she had absolute control. No matter the situation or what waited for her outside that door, this was a talent she never lost. Her hands were perfectly still. They were always still. For 4 complete minutes, Barnes's blood pressure remained at 93/61. Flora finally allowed herself to accept it. She did not celebrate or sigh in relief. She just trusted it, like you trust that a bridge will hold you when you step on it. You cannot be certain until you are across, but you must proceed. "He requires a vascular surgeon and a sterile operating room," she said, her eyes still on her work. "Who do we have available at this hospital?" "Dr. Renata Vasquez is the one on call," Paul answered. "She is exceptional, one of the very best." "Get her in here. It is 2 in the morning. Paul, get her in here." He took out his phone. Flora glanced at Barnes's face. The gray pallor of his skin was receding. It was a subtle sign, but it meant his body was beginning to recover. He was only in his mid-30s, but he looked so much older tonight. He had always seemed older than his years. She once teased him about that, in another life where laughter was still common for her. "Hey," Ortega said softly beside her. "Are you all right?" Flora looked at her. Ortega was 31, deft with her hands, and had an even sharper intuition. Flora had always liked working alongside her. "I am fine," Flora said. Ortega observed her for a moment, sensing that her answer was incomplete. She then turned her attention back to the patient's monitors. Flora stripped off her outer gloves and put on a fresh pair. She had 11 minutes, perhaps even less. She would use every single second. At 2:13 in the morning, the mood in the emergency room shifted. The soldiers were no longer relaxed. They began to move with a sharp, focused energy. checking sight lines, speaking in low tones, and watching their colonel with attention that alarmed the hospital staff. A significant threat was approaching. Cassie, a young nurse who was easy to read, walked over to Sergeant Reyes near the window. "Are we going to be okay?" she asked. Reyes looked directly at her. "Only if you stay away from the windows and follow my orders exactly, should it come to that." "You did not say we would be." "No," Reyes conceded. "I did not." The color vanished from Cassie's face, but she did not say anything else. Across the way, Marcus Webb, Paul's resident, stood at the nurse's station. He pretended to look at charts, but he was just staring at a dark monitor. He was stuck between the miracle he had just seen and the danger that was waiting outside. Gerald Harmon had been on a call for 6 minutes straight. His voice was low and controlled, giving away nothing, but his reddened face suggested otherwise. Deborah was no longer just observing, she was acting. She started to move any patient who could walk away from the windows and outer walls. She switched off non-essential lights in the East Wing. She sent 3 nurses to stay with patients upstairs and ordered them not to leave. She delivered these instructions with a command in her voice that left no room for questions. At 61, she had seen it all, including 3 hurricanes, a mass casualty event, and a chemical leak that emptied a whole floor. She did not panic. Panicking was a privilege for people who had time, which she did not. She went to Vance, who was looking out a window that faced south. "What kind of trouble are we dealing with?" she asked. His eyes stayed fixed on the outside, the kind that is extremely competent. "Are your soldiers more competent?" A long silence followed. "On a good day, they are." "And is today a good day?" The silence stretched on. "It is a difficult day." Deborah said, "I need a direct answer from you, or my patients will be the ones who suffer." At last, Vance turned to look at her. "I will do everything within my power to see that does not happen. That is not a guarantee." "No," he admitted, "it is not." For 3 full seconds, Deborah stared directly at him. Then she gave a single, firm nod, accepting the harsh truth, and went back to her work. At 2:19 in the morning, Vance's radio crackled to life. "Colonel, we have a visual on 2 vehicles. They are black sport utility vehicles, stopped 250 meters to our south. They are not advancing, but we can count at least 4 individuals inside, possibly more. Copy. Hold your ground. If they make a move on this building, you notify me first. Do not engage." "Yes, sir." A brief pause. "Sir, Richter reports one of them has a rifle scope on our position." Vance's jaw clenched. "Understood." He set the radio down and turned to Harmon. The man had ended his call and was standing near. The anger he had shown before was replaced by a quiet, defensive look. "Gerald," Vance began, his voice low enough that only Harmon could hear. "Can you give me one reason why they were able to find us this quickly?" "John, that is a very grave accusation." "But it is not a denial." "No," Harmon conceded, "it is not." He finally turned to face him. "I received this location from official intelligence only 40 minutes ago." "I already told you that." "How official?" Silence. "Gerald." "There may have been a security breach," Harmon admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "Inside the agency. We do not know the extent." "You suspected there was a breach and you came here anyway?" "I came to evaluate the problem." "You led them right to us." Vance's voice did not get louder. It changed. It became flat, cold, and unnervingly calm. "You knew about a security leak, you boarded an airplane showing your government ID, and you came directly to a classified site." Harmon began to object. "I was not aware the breach involved. How long have you known about this leak?" Silence. "Gerald, how long?" 6 days, Harmon confessed. The words hung in the air between them. 6 days. The very same amount of time since Barnes's operation had been exposed. The same 6 days Barnes was injured and transported across the world to a secret hospital. Suddenly, Vance understood it all. He raised his radio. His voice was completely composed. "Reyes, consider this position exposed. Get the patient ready for evacuation." "I need an exit plan." "Sir, the patient is not stable enough to be moved." "I am aware. Formulate a plan anyway." He put the radio down and glared at Harmon. If that woman gets harmed because of a leak you hid for 6 days, you and I will have nothing to say to each other for the next 10 years. Harmon offered no reply to the question. Vance left him and headed for the trauma bay. The time was 2:24 in the morning. Flora felt him coming. It was not a sound, just a subtle shift in the room's pressure before the door swung open. The air always changed when Vance was near. She had learned that feeling over 2 years. She kept her eyes forward. Barnes is improved from 20 minutes ago, she said. He is stable enough for surgery. A specialist can handle it now. Vance immediately shut her down. He is staying right here tonight, Flora. And before you start to argue, moving him will undo all the work I did over the last 90 minutes. I will not let that progress be lost. Not for convenience, not for protocol, and not unless everyone here is in immediate danger. Then Vance revealed the truth. The leak was internal. Harmon has known for 6 days. Flora went completely still. Ortega looked up. Paul turned. The monitors beeped on, oblivious to the crushing news. Flora repeated the words in a low voice. 6 days. Correct, Vance said. She placed her instrument down carefully and met his gaze. Her mind assessed him the way it did any threat, quickly and without feeling. The timeline was already forming. Barnes's entire mission was compromised 6 days before. First, Barnes was attacked. Then, he ended up here. And in that 6-day window, someone with knowledge of the mission, of her presence, and this facility became a traitor. Her question was sharp. Who had my location? Vance's answer was grim. A very small group. Me, 2 senior officers, and Harmon. She spoke his name like a curse. Harmon. Yes, and he came right here, to this clinic. He did, Vance added. Used his official credentials, bold as anything. Vance's grim look left no room for doubt. For a brief moment, her eyes glanced up. Then they focused back on him. Move all non-essential staff to the upper floors. Immediately. I do not mean in 10 minutes. I mean right now. Flora stripped off her gloves. Reyes is already handling it, Colonel. Give me a full manifest of your assets outside. When they realize I am here, they will not sit around politely. And when that assault begins, I need to understand this building from their point of view. For a second, Vance just stared, his expression a conflict of feelings he could not name. At last, he replied, "We have 2 tactical units of 6 men with standard equipment. There is also a sniper positioned on the eastern rooftop." She pointed out the flaw. That sniper is blind to a western approach. I am aware, he said. O'Kane has eyes on the west. O'Kane is reliable, I know, she replied. The familiarity in her tone when she spoke the soldier's name told Paul and Ortega more about Flora Montgomery than their past 3 years working together. And the parking structure? I have got 2 men stationed on the 2nd floor. Move 1 man to the service corridor on the ground floor, she ordered. It is the most direct route from the garage to our position. Vance paused. You have memorized the blueprints? I always memorize the blueprints, she said simply. She looked toward Barnes, her hand grazing his bed rail. The brief contact was warm, not medical. She turned to Paul. He needs constant observation. I want to be paged at the slightest change in his pressure. It does not matter where I am. Paul's voice was calm. I have already called Vasquez. She is en route. She will arrive in 15 minutes. He was mentally rewriting his entire opinion of Flora. Good. As soon as she gets here, put her in a prepped operating room. You can brief her on the situation. Flora moved toward the exit. Flora, Paul's voice stopped her in her tracks. She turned around. His look was unexpectedly firm, a reminder that there was more to him than a cheerful demeanor. He asked, "What is your plan?" She held his gaze for a few seconds. I am going to handle this. Then she was gone, through the doors. The time was 2:31 in the morning. A new feeling had settled over the emergency room in the past hour. The first wave of chaos was gone, replaced by a tense, waiting fear. It was that specific kind of anxiety you feel when you know something terrible is coming, but you are powerless to prevent it. Deborah was at her post, at the nurse's station. She watched Flora walk up, but remained silent, which was not like her at all. Her quietness confirmed she had heard Vance's news. Flora just said, "The upper levels." "I took care of that 15 minutes ago," Deborah said, looking directly at her. "I told everyone it was a random fire drill." A faint smile touched Flora's lips. Clever. "How is Barnes doing?" Barely holding on, Flora surveyed the area. Reyes and a pair of soldiers guarded the ambulance entrance. Harmon was against a wall, looking at his phone like a condemned man. Near the medicine station, Cassie and 2 junior nurses were grouped together, failing to hide their fear. Flora approached them. Cassie's eyes met hers, full of unasked questions. "I need your complete attention," Flora began. She used her trauma voice, the one that sliced through panic and demanded focus. "The 3 of you, take the med cart. Get all essential supplies from cold storage as well. Bring everything to the 2nd floor supply room. You will lock the door and you will not open it for anyone. Deborah or I will get you personally. Not a soldier, not another doctor, only us." "What about our remaining patients on this floor?" Cassie asked. "Bays 1 and 2 are empty. The patient in 3 is mobile. I will handle Bay 5. Flora looked at each nurse in turn. "Is that understood?" They all nodded in unison. "Move out." As they rushed off, she saw Marcus Webb still standing by the station. At 29, his residency was not supposed to involve this. "Webb," she said, her voice sharp. He startled. "Yes, ma'am, right here. You have worked in trauma before." "Yes. I completed a standard rotation 6 months back." "That will have to do. You are to remain with Dr. Hennessy and Barnes until Vasquez gets here. Do not exit that room, period. Do not unlock that door for anybody unless you hear from me or Paul. Do you understand?" Marcus's gaze flickered to the trauma bay, then back to Flora. He swallowed hard. "Yes, go." He vanished. Flora turned back to Deborah. "You should head upstairs with the others." Deborah gave her a look that was pure outrage. "Absolutely not." "Deborah," Flora warned. "I have been a nurse here for 9 years, Flora Montgomery. Do not you dare think I am going to hide in a closet while my emergency room is." Flora cut her off. "All right, fine, but you will stay at this station, and you will stay low when it starts." Deborah echoed the word. "Starts? What exactly is about to start?" Flora simply met her stare. "Honestly, I have no idea. That is the simple truth." Deborah absorbed this with the poise of a veteran who knew that life, like medicine, seldom gave clear answers. "All right," she finally said. "How can I be useful?" Just as Flora was about to reply, the silence was broken by the sharp crackle of Vance's radio. A voice came over the radio. "Colonel, we have activity." It was 2:38 in the morning. A car raced toward the southern parking entrance. Reyes saw it first, her eyes already fixed on the south window. The second its headlights swept the pavement, she reacted. "Fast-moving vehicle, south entrance," she called out. Her tone was perfectly steady, not a hint of alarm, just the crisp, disciplined voice of a soldier on duty. "Colonel, that vehicle just crashed the gate. O'Kane, report on the western approach." O'Kane's voice came through the static. "West is quiet. The service road is completely clear. Baker, Chang, moved to the south exit, on the double." Vance was already by the corridor entrance when he noticed Flora beside him. She had moved without a sound. It was one of her traits that he found both irritating and admirable. "It is a distraction," Flora said in a low voice. "One car is meant to draw our eyes from the real threat." But O'Kane said the West was secure, which is precisely the point. "They need you to look away from the West," she countered, her gaze unwavering. "That service road connects to a back entrance, one that is not on public maps. They did their research." She reminded him. They had 6 days for it. Vance held her stare for a beat, then grabbed his radio. "O'Kane, I need you inside that service hallway, now. Ignore the road, get inside." The radio went quiet, except for the hiss of static. "Sir, the door to the corridor is sealed," O'Kane reported back. Then a deep, echoing boom reverberated through the hospital's structure. It was not gunfire. It was the solid, wrenching noise of a heavy door being forced open. That noise came from the loading dock, Deborah whispered from her station. But Flora was already on the move. Flora, wait up, Vance called out to her. It was pointless. She had already vanished through a side door as his radio came alive again. Reyes was reporting that the vehicle to the south had come to a stop. 2 people were now walking to the ambulance entrance. They were being hit from 2 sides at the same time. Caught in the middle, inside a poorly lit service hall of an Oregon hospital, Montgomery crept toward a sound that no one could place, but every one of them felt it was a threat. The time was 2:41 in the morning. The corridor was dark, the way service passages always are in the dead of night. The 2 men inside were not using flashlights, guided only by the dim red glow of the exit signs. That was all the illumination they needed, but it was also all the illumination that Flora needed. She did not have a weapon. There was no way to get one, a conclusion she reached within the first 30 seconds of the alarm. Every single thing she did from that moment on was guided by that fact. But she did have the building. She knew every single inch of this hospital. They did not. She pushed her body flat against the wall where the service passage met the main supply corridor. She simply listened. She could hear 2 sets of footsteps approaching slowly. They believed they were still moving in secret. They were making their way to the pharmacy hall, which would give them a straight path to the emergency room. She did not waste a moment thinking about her choices. There was no decision that had to be made. There was only the next task that needed to be done. She went around the corner, moving to the loading dock and away from the footsteps. She ran past the emergency floodlight control and hit it hard with her hand. The corridor was suddenly filled with a brilliant white light. She heard the men stop, and their sharp, surprised breaths told her exactly where they were. She could hear them trying to figure out what to do. She was already at the loading dock intercom, with her finger on the button for every single floor. Her voice was steady, the one she used when she was in command. This is a security warning. We have 2 intruders in the service level passage. All staff, stay alert. A heavy sound slammed into the wall right beside her head. She jumped behind a control panel and crawled to the left, keeping herself low. She found protection behind a tall rack of medical supplies. Her heart was racing in her chest, but her mind shifted to another gear. It was a cold, sharp, and focused place she had known for most of her life before she decided to live another way. She had forgotten how total the silence was down here. She heard the sound of boots scraping on the concrete floor. One man was coming forward fast. The other one was staying behind, covering him. It was a common 2-person tactical approach. She recognized it. She had prepared for this very situation. A hand grabbed the metal shelf next to her, and it shook. Before he could push it over, she was gone. She moved around the other side, fast and low. The man closest to her had only a moment to see she was not where he thought. In the next second, she took his arm, using his own forward push to throw him off balance. He fell hard on the floor. His partner cried out his name. She was already disappearing through the door at the end of the corridor. The clock on the wall said it was 2:44 in the morning. She came into the emergency room from the stairs, and every person there turned to stare. Vance was by the ambulance bay with Reyes and 2 others attending to new arrivals. His eyes met Flora's instantly. In that one quiet look, they said more than most people say in a long conversation. "I was in the service corridor," she announced. "There were 2 of them. One is on the ground. The other has either escaped or is calling for more people." Reyes was already talking into her radio. Harmon ran over from the other side of the room, his face pale from fear. "We have to begin the extraction this instant. We can get Barnes on a..." Flora stopped him short, saying, "You will not be making that decision." She did not even look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the hallway she had just come from. "Barnes is staying right here. This whole building has been compromised." She continued plainly. "This hospital was compromised 6 days ago." This time, she looked right at Harmon. Whatever he saw in her eyes made him go silent. "It was a security failure that you were aware of, so you do not get to decide what happens next." A sudden noise came from the ambulance bay. It was the sound of Reyes shouting a command into her radio. That was followed by the clear sound of a struggle right outside the doors. The entire emergency room went quiet. The doors flew open, and Oe came in backward. He was holding a man in normal clothes who was fighting him as hard as he could. "I have the second man from the hall," Otmoe said, catching his breath. "Baker has the other one secured out back." The man he was holding looked frantically all around the room. His eyes were wide with fear, looking for a way to escape. He looked past the soldiers, the doctors, and even past Vance. Then his eyes landed on Flora, and he went still. Flora looked directly back at him. She spoke to Vance, her voice a quiet whisper. "I know him." Vance turned to her. "From where?" She held Vance's stare for a long, heavy second. "From before." It was 2:51 in the morning. His name was Dolan. She knew him as a logistics officer from a special team. She had shaken his hand at a meeting 18 months before the crash that was meant to have ended her life. He had a normal face and a very professional way about him. Nothing about him back then made her think he was anything but a loyal soldier. She had been so wrong. She saw everything with perfect clarity now. It was the kind of clarity that comes when one new fact forces you to re-examine every old memory and it all finally clicks into place. "How long?" she asked him. He did not say a word. "How long were you selling out our people?" She took a step closer. Oe's hand got tighter on Dolan's arm, but Flora's voice was not filled with rage. It was calm, direct, and controlled, which was much more unnerving. "Was Kandahar your doing?" For just a second, a look of recognition flashed across Dolan's face. "What happened in Kandahar?" Vance asked. Flora's eyes were still glued to Dolan. "We sent 3 agents to a location we believed was secure, but someone leaked their position." The words hung in the tense air. One of our own never made it back. The emergency room became perfectly still. Over at the main desk, Deborah was a statue. Her hands pressed hard against the counter. Dolan's voice was a hoarse whisper. "But you were dead." The crash report was official. "You cannot confirm what is not there," Flora shot back. "I made sure the scene was wiped clean. Nothing left for you to find." At last, she turned to face Vance. That plane crash was no accident. Vance stared, unable to process her words. "I arranged the entire thing," she admitted. "I knew we had a traitor on the team. I just was not sure who." "I had to disappear before they got to me," she said. She turned back to Dolan. "I did not know it was you at the time, but I am positive now." Dolan's jaw was tight. "You have no proof." "I do not need any proof," Flora said in a calm voice. "You came here, to this hospital, with a tactical group in the middle of the night. The security footage by itself will start a very serious conversation." She gave a small nod to Oe. "Get him away from me." Oe started to pull him away. Dolan struggled, but he was taken out quickly. Vance was looking at Flora with a look she had never seen. It was an expression he probably saved for only a few people. "You faked your own death," he said. It was not a question, but a statement he was trying to accept. "Yes," she replied simply. "Because you believed the team was compromised." "Because the team was compromised," she corrected him in a soft voice. "I just did not have the evidence at the time. And you never told me." She looked him right in the eye. "I did not know if the mole was you." A deep silence grew between them, full of the weight of years of trust that had been built between them. An awkward silence formed between two people who once had complete trust in each other, but had just found the place where that trust was broken. Vance spoke first. "It was not me. I know that now," she admitted. After another moment, he said, "I am so sorry." She could hear the honest regret in his voice, which made it both easier and more difficult to hear. "I know you are," she answered quietly. Deborah's voice cut through the tension at the perfect moment, a skill she had mastered. "Vasquez is here," she said. She appeared from a hallway with a small, sharp-featured woman in her 50s. The new arrival pulled on a pair of gloves, her calm eyes quickly studying the chaotic scene. She had clearly been woken from a deep sleep, but it did not seem to bother her. "She has to see Barnes right away." Flora turned. The emergency room was a complete disaster, filled with people who would never forget this night. But it was still her area of responsibility, her place. She began to walk to the trauma bay. Flora, Vance, called after her. She paused, but did not turn to face him. "We have to talk," he said, "about what we are going to do now." "I know," she replied. She stood perfectly still for a second in the middle of the room. The lights above cast a bright, harsh glow on everything. It was the type of lighting that hospitals use because there is no place for shadows to hide. She felt the incredible pressure of the night, and of the last 3 years she lived as a ghost, finally settle upon her shoulders. The last 90 minutes spent saving Barnes's life weighed on her. The name she had abandoned, the new life she had built, and the persistent emptiness between them all pressed down on her. Straightening her posture, she covered the angel wing tattoo on her arm and moved forward. A patient had to be transferred, a surgeon was awaiting a report, and the entire floor needed to be restored to order. Everything else had to wait. After 1 hour and 43 minutes of surgery, Dr. Renata Vasquez appeared. She lowered her mask with the directness of someone who had stopped trying to soften bad news. Flora was waiting just outside in the corridor. She had not taken a seat once. She stood with her back against the wall, her arms loose at her sides, and her eyes locked on the doors to the operating room. She had been in that exact place since Barnes was taken in, and a part of her had gone in with him. Vasquez met her eyes. "He is out of the operation," she announced. Flora said nothing. Her gaze remained fixed on the surgeon's face. "The vascular repairs are successful," Vasquez continued. "The damage to his chest was severe, but we have it contained. He lost a great deal of blood." She paused. "But he is through it, and his blood pressure is holding. Very steady. Not the kind we need to constantly manage." It was the sort of stability that signaled his own body was starting to take over. Flora released a quiet breath. It was barely perceptible, but Vasquez, at 54 and an expert at observing people, caught it. "You did phenomenal work on him," Vasquez told her. "Your pre-hospital care was exceptional." Flora looked at her for a second. "Thank you, Renata." Vasquez watched her with the intense, professional focus of a surgeon. She had just seen exceptional ability in a crisis, and she always recognized true talent. "Do you wish to see him?" she inquired. "Not right now," Flora answered. "I want him to have some real rest first." Vasquez gave a short nod of understanding. "He will be calling for you the second he is conscious. You also need to know whatever is happening between you two. He said your name right before the anesthesia took effect. Not Angel. He said Flora." She gave her a pointed look. "Just Flora." Flora pressed her lips together and stayed silent. Vasquez put a firm, comforting hand on her shoulder and then continued down the hall. Flora stood by herself in the hallway for a full 30 seconds. She then collected herself, pulled down her sleeve, and went to look for Vance. At 4:23 in the morning, she found him in the family waiting area. For the first time in many hours, he was completely alone. He was sitting with his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together in front of him. In that moment, he seemed less like a senior military officer and more like an exhausted traveler finishing a very long road. Flora took the seat facing him without being asked. He glanced up at her. "He is out of the operating room," she said. "Vasquez says he is stable." Vance closed his eyes for a few moments. When he opened them, the colonel was mostly back in control. "Good," he said, his voice now clearly rougher than it was at 2 in the morning. "That is very welcome news. Harmon is in federal custody," she went on, "as of about 40 minutes ago. The other 2 from the corridor are being processed." He looked at his hands. "There is going to be a proper investigation. A real one this time. How high up the command do you think it goes?" "We are not certain yet." He finally met her eyes. "High enough that your name is showing up in places it should not be. High enough that the whole official narrative from 3 years ago is being taken apart." Flora leaned into her chair. The waiting room was deserted except for them. Outside, the sky above the trees was just starting to lighten into a shade of gray. It was the pale glow that appears before the sun rises, when the day ahead is still unwritten. "You are here to ask me to come back," she said directly. "I am here because your official testimony is needed for the investigation." Vance responded carefully. "And the mission that Barnes and his unit started is not over. That is not a straight answer." "No," he agreed, "it is not." He held her gaze. "I do want you to return. I think your abilities are being squandered here." Flora replied. I help save people in this place every night. You save people wherever you go. That is not the question. Then what is the question? He paused. The question is if this is the life you really want, or just the one you chose because you felt you had no alternative. Flora met his gaze for a long time. From down the hall, she could hear Deborah's calming voice, restoring order to the floor. The hospital was gradually finding its normal rhythm after a night of chaos. She heard the sound of monitors beeping, of footsteps on the floor, and the chime of a distant elevator. I need to consider this, she said. Vance nodded. I understand, and I will give you time. No calls for a week. No ambushes in the parking garage. Understood. She stood up from her chair, and he stood up too. It was a formal reflex from another time, to rise when a discussion became important. They looked at each other, and Flora felt the complex history she had with John Vance. He was her mentor. But he was also a man with secrets who had just turned her new life upside down. In one night, he had changed everything. Things were never straightforward, but she had let go of the idea of a simple life long ago. You should get some rest, Colonel, she told him. You too, he said. A small smile almost formed. My shift ends at 7. She turned and began to walk away. At 4:31 in the morning, Deborah was at the nursing station holding a coffee cup. She had the expression of someone who had solved a crisis and was now facing the required paperwork. She looked up as Flora approached. Barnes is going to be okay. It was a statement of fact, not a question. I'm guessing Vasquez told you. Vasquez and I talk about everything. We have been working side by side for 6 years. Deborah put her mug down. How are you holding up? Flora sat in the chair opposite her. A powerful exhaustion washed over her. The first she had felt all night. It was not from a lack of rest, but from the feeling of being seen after 3 years in hiding. I honestly have no idea yet, she admitted. Deborah accepted the answer without judgment. She was someone who understood that honesty was better than false comfort, so she offered no empty words. Instead, she pushed her own cup of coffee across the counter to Flora. Flora just stared at the mug. She picked it up and took a sip. You know the staff is going to have questions, Deborah mentioned. Cassie is already speculating that you are a spy. Cassie is not that far off, Flora said. I told her you were a nurse. That is not that far off either. Deborah watched her for a second. So which one are you going to be now? Flora put the mug back down. Her eyes swept over the nursing station, taking in the monitors, the patient files, and the medication guides she knew by heart. She saw the patient list on the main board. It was the simple, crucial center of a place where scared and wounded people came for help. I am just going to be me, Flora said, whatever that becomes. Deborah nodded. That is a very solid answer. You really think so? It is the truth for right now, and that is what matters. At 4:44 in the morning, Paul Hennessy found her in Supply Bay 3, refilling the shelves. He had seen her do this same chore before, but this time felt entirely different. He stood in the doorway and watched. She knew he was standing there but kept on with her task. Vasquez says he is on track for a full recovery, Paul said. I know. She also explained what you did in there. The field medicine techniques, the way you repurposed the defibrillator, how you stabilized his injuries. He paused for a beat before saying more. She said that in her 22 years of surgery, she has never witnessed anything like it. Vasquez is being kind, Flora said. Flora. The way he said her name was new. It was missing his usual reserved, professional tone from before. He was not hiding his feelings anymore. This had become personal. Please, just talk to me. Not as a work colleague or as another doctor. He stopped. Talk to me as the man who spent a year trying to get to know you just to learn that I did not know you at all. Flora stopped her work. She turned to look at him. Paul Hennessy was a kind man. She had recognized that from the very start, which was the exact reason she had kept him at a distance. Kind men deserved the truth, and, for the last 3 years, the truth was something she could not afford to give. I was never going to tell you, she said. Not because I didn't want to. It was because I had something to protect. Were you protecting yourself? Yes. And everyone else in this hospital, he processed that. The accident 3 years ago. You were a part of that? Yes. And you got away? I arranged for it to happen, she confessed. So that I could vanish. I had to protect my unit from a threat I could not yet prove. He was silent for a moment. That sounds like the loneliest thing in the whole world. Flora looked at him. That was not the reaction she had braced herself for. She had expected a lot of questions, for the doctor and him to want to analyze her. That is not exactly how it happened, she said quietly. Paul looked weary and honest, like he had dropped his guard completely. So where do we go from here? Vance is asking for you to come back. He asks for a lot of things. But what about what you want? She took a moment, not because she was unsure, but to make certain her answer was perfect. I want to finish my workday, she said firmly. Then, I need to get some sleep. I will sort out the rest later. He watched her for a moment. Can I ask you one last thing? Go ahead. It is about the picture in your locker, he began, the one you think is a secret. Flora froze completely. Paul's voice was soft. I accidentally saw it about 2 years ago. You left the door open a little when Sims called you away. I promise I was not snooping. He hesitated. I saw the people in uniform. You looked different, maybe younger, but you also looked more real than you ever look here. He looked right at her. Were those the people from your old team? Flora looked down for a moment, then met his gaze. Yes, she answered. Were they a good team? Most of them were, she said. Yes. Paul nodded slowly. I just want you to know, he said, that no matter what you decide, no matter what happens next, you were one of the good ones here, too. He said it simply, not trying to be charming or romantic. It was just a statement of fact. You made this hospital a better place. The patients were safer because of you. We were all better. He paused. I just needed you to know that someone saw the real you, even when you worked so hard to hide her. Flora stared at him for a long moment. Her mind went to her far-off parking spot, the 6 words she whispered before every single shift. She thought of how her sleeves were always pulled down, the photo tucked away in locker 47. She thought of Michael Barnes saying her real name before his surgery, not a code name, just Flora. She thought of Deborah Sims clearing the hall without being asked. She just saw the look on Flora's face and acted. The same woman who told a colonel and a director, you both should be ashamed. And the cafeteria worker who slid a coffee to her at 4:30 in the morning. She thought of Cassie, just 26, and scared, who stayed and did just what she was asked. And Ortega, who was always a steady hand in an emergency. And Marcus Webb, who looked frightened but walked into the trauma room anyway. She thought about the quiet, safe life she built by making herself small every day. She wondered if being small really kept her safe, and if being safe was the same as doing the right thing. And she asked herself if doing good was a one-time choice or something you had to decide on again and again every single night. Then she picked up the supply list she had dropped. You should go home and get some sleep, Paul, she said. He smiled a real smile. It was not his usual charming one for the hospital. This was a small, genuine smile she rarely saw. There is no one else like you. People keep saying that, she replied. And with that, he was gone. At 5:02 in the morning, Barnes was awake. It was sooner than Vasquez expected, but Michael Barnes had always been early. He did not wake up gradually. He sat straight up, instantly awake, the way a soldier is trained to be. His hand reflexively reached for a weapon that was not there. His eyes swept the room before his brain caught up with what he was seeing. Then, it all clicked into place. A white ceiling, medical equipment, and a window with the first light of morning. A strange nurse was checking his intravenous drip. He looked right at the nurse and said one word, Montgomery, he rasped. His voice was raw and broken. The nurse looked up from her chart. Sir, please try to stay calm. You are in recovery. You are safe now. Flora Montgomery, he said again, his voice gaining strength. Where is she? I need to see her. He tried to get up, but a sharp pain shot through his body. You need to go find her, he commanded. It was an order, not a request. The nurse understood the urgency and left at once. At 5:09 in the morning, Flora walked into the room. Barnes saw her just like he did years ago, in a burning building in a country she should not have been in. She had appeared like a ghost out of the smoke. With his usual dry humor, he said, "Well, it is about time. I was starting to think you would not show up." He looked smaller in the hospital bed. Strong men often do when they are injured. But his eyes had not changed, still sharp and tired, holding 15 years of a hard past they both shared. "You look terrible," she told him. She moved a chair next to his bed. "I got shot," he said simply. "What is your excuse? It has been a very long night." He looked at her closely for a second. "You saved me again," he said. "That is 2 times now. I know how to count, Michael." "And you are still here," he observed. "In this hospital, wearing that uniform. This is what I do now." "Right." He watched her face carefully, like someone who could see right through her. "You seem different. You already said I look terrible." "No, I mean, you are different from when I first got here." He paused. "You look like someone who just remembered who she really is." Flora looked down at her own hands. The angel wing tattoo on her wrist peeked out from her sleeve. She did not try to hide it. "Barnes," she started. "Montgomery. How did they find you?" His jaw tightened in anger. "Dolan. It had to be Dolan. No, I mean, how did it happen?" "The mission briefing," he said. "The night before we went in. Everyone in that room was supposed to be trusted." He stared at the blank ceiling. "He was behind Kandahar too, was he not?" "Yes." "He was quiet for a long while." "Chen," he said softly. "Chen was the one who died in Kandahar. His name was a burden she carried, just like the tattoo, always there, even when hidden." "Yes," she said gently. He closed his eyes, then opened them again. "I looked for you for a long time after that. I know you did. You could have called me." "I could not call anyone," she answered. "If I told one person, I would have to worry about who they told, and then who that person told." Her voice faded. "I did not know how deep it went. I could not risk it." "Did you suspect Dolan?" "I knew we had a traitor. I just never knew who it was." She looked him straight in the eye. "I am sorry I could not tell you." He met her stare for a long moment. "Never apologize for staying alive," he said, his voice softer now. "You do not owe that to anybody." She looked at him, letting his words sink in. His kindness healed a part of her she did not know was still broken. "Vance wants me to come back," she told him. "I know." He kept watching her. "What do you want?" That was the second time someone had asked her that tonight. She thought about the simple answer she gave to Paul. She looked at Barnes, the only person who knew both of her lives, who knew who she was before she became a nurse. "I want to stop running," she said quietly. "I am just not sure which direction to run." Barnes was silent for a minute, thinking. Then he said, "You know what I figured out about you years ago?" "What is that?" "You always see your life as a choice between 2 things. Staying or going. Past or future. Medic or nurse. It is always one or the other." He shifted in the bed, and pain crossed his face. "But you have been both people this whole time. Every single night you came to work here. You just would not admit it." Flora said nothing. "You did not vanish when you came here," he went on. "You built something real, something that belonged only to you." He looked at her with a steady, confident gaze. "Your code name was not who you are. It was just a part you played. The uniform is a part. The tattoo is a part. It is all just a part of you." She looked down at the angel wing on her wrist. She remembered getting it done, alone in a strange city, in a shop that smelled like cleaning supplies and old coffee. She had told herself it was a memorial, a way to say goodbye to Angel 6 before she became a new person. But sitting there at 5 in the morning, she knew she was wrong. It was not a goodbye. It was a bridge, proof that the woman from before and the woman from after were the same all along. No part of her life had erased another. She did not leave her spirit behind in the smoke, she carried all of it with her. At 8 in the morning, Vance was in the hall with his coat on, ready to leave. Flora walked up to him. He saw a new determination in her eyes that made him stop and wait to hear what she had to say. "I am prepared to make a formal statement," she announced. "I will explain everything I know about Dolan." the security failures, and Kandahar. Every last detail. She looked him straight in the eye. However, the official report must show that I am a witness, not a former operative. The record will state that I am a civilian nurse caught in a difficult situation. Vance watched her for a second before asking, "And what comes after the investigation is finished?" She repeated, "After the investigation is finished, I will figure out my next move." He noted, "That is not a commitment." "No," she agreed, "but it is not a refusal either." He considered her words for a long moment. Then he extended his hand toward her. She met his gaze, then took his hand and shook it firmly. It was a solid, honest handshake between two people who had found common ground. He explained there was one last thing. Flora waited for him to continue. He told her that her coworkers, the other nurses, and the doctor would need a security interview. They had to be told what they were allowed to say about that night. He paused to let that sink in, then promised to handle it delicately. Flora thought of Deborah, who moved patients away from the walls on instinct and challenged generals without seeking any praise. She thought of Paul in the doorway of Bay 3 at 4:40 in the morning, telling her he saw how hard she was working. She thought of Ortega, Cassie, and Marcus Webb, who had all survived the night. "They are very good people," she said. "They will handle it well." "I have no doubt," Vance answered. "They have an amazing nurse." He turned to leave. At the door, he looked back at her one more time. It was a quick glance, as if to capture the moment in his memory. Then he disappeared. She went back to her work. That was the most direct way to describe what she did next. She returned to her job. Her shift did not end until 7, and patients were waiting for her. There was a hospital ward that needed managing and a status chart to update. It was the normal, vital, and unending work of a place where hurt people came to heal. Deborah found her at the nurse's station and handed her a new set of charts without a word. Deborah knew that the best thing for someone who had just been through a battle was a new task. Ortega was busy restocking medical supplies. Cassie was helping a new patient, a 70-year-old man with a possible hip fracture, who was being brave in the way that older men often are, as if showing pain was a sign of weakness. Flora went to him first. She introduced herself, her voice perfectly calm and steady. She asked his name, giving him her complete and undivided attention. Flora understood that the man before her was the only person who mattered right then. His name was Gerald. He was 72 years old and had fallen while taking his dog outside. Flora asked, "Is your dog all right?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Yes," he said. It scared him, though. "He always waits for me right by the door when I go out." She smiled warmly. "He sounds like a wonderful dog. Let us get you taken care of so you can go home to him." Gerald looked at her face for a moment. "You are a very good nurse," he said, with the simple honesty of a man who did not waste words. Flora looked directly into his eyes. "Thank you, Gerald," she replied, and she meant every word. At 6:58 in the morning, just 1 minute before the shift ended, Flora Montgomery was at the station, completing her final report. The emergency room had returned to its usual pace. It was the special kind of productive calm that comes after a crisis has passed and everyone has moved forward. That was the nature of the job, a cycle that truly never stopped. She looked at the patient board. It listed 12 names, and 3 were ready for discharge. Barnstable was recovering safely. Dolan was in federal custody, somewhere she no longer had to think about. Vance was on an airplane. She glanced down at the sleeve of her scrubs, and then, with deliberate purpose, she pushed it up to her elbow. It was a conscious decision, not a thoughtless action. The angel wing tattoo was still visible. It had strong, dark lines, sharp feathers, and the small flaws that come from being done by hand. She had not truly looked at it for a long time, like how you stop noticing things you see every day. But this time, she stared right at it, the way Barnes had taught her to confront things head on. It was not a marker of an end. It was never about an ending. It was the connection between two parts of her life, both completely real, belonging to one person who survived chaos and 3 years of hiding to get through the night. Deborah came to stand beside her. She noticed the tattoo but said nothing about it. "It was a good shift," Deborah remarked instead. Flora looked at her, confused. It was a horrible shift. Deborah simply answered, "Those are still shifts. And they can still be good ones." Flora gently pulled her sleeve back down, but a second later, she pushed it right back up. As the morning crew arrived, Flora Montgomery, night nurse and former combat medic Angel 6, signed out at 7:03 in the morning. She went to her car and sat there. She took a long, deep breath in the gentle morning light. Crying did not come naturally to her, and the night's chaos had not altered that fact. She took the old photo out of her pocket. She had gotten it from Locker 47 before she left. It did not have to be hidden anymore. The picture showed 7 soldiers in uniform, squinting into a bright sun in a place that was hot, dusty, and a different world from Oregon. Michael Barnes stood second from the left, wearing the familiar mischievous smile that always got him into trouble. She was third from the right, looking directly at the camera. Her eyes belonged to someone who had no idea what her future held. In that single photograph, she was simply herself, without any pretense. She stared at the picture for a very long time. Then, she set it on her dashboard where the sunlight could touch it and started the engine. For 3 difficult years, Flora Montgomery had lived as though being invisible was the only way to nation stay safe. She finally realized how mistaken she had been. It was not because the night had broken her or stolen something that could not be returned. It was because the night had demonstrated the complete opposite was true. It had shown that every piece of her past was still with her, very much alive, and that she was the same person she had always been. No amount of quiet living or keeping people at a distance could ever alter her core identity. She was Flora Montgomery. She was Angel 6. She was the woman who ran from a life of chaos to begin again in a quiet suburban hospital, helping people the only way she knew how. She did her work with all of her heart, never giving less than her best, with hands that were always perfectly steady. She was all of these things at once. She had been that person the entire time, and now she was absolutely finished with hiding.